what they have been seeking to do to contain this spread, as they say, and to protect both lives and livelihoods in the face of this latest pandemic, which has been with us thus far for the better part of the last 18 months. In this episode, we seek to explore the ramifications of the legality of mandatory sanctions in vaccines in Trinidad and Tobago. Members of our panel this evening are as follows: Mr. Travis Sinanan, attorney; Mr. Joseph Remy, representing one element of the trade union movement in Trinidad and Tobago; and Mr. Kurt Conrad Waldron, an attorney. Each of them will speak for about 15 minutes, after which we'll throw the proceedings open for questions and queries from you in the listening and viewing audience. We'll seek to bring the curtains down after about 90 minutes of what we expect to be scintillating, educating, and informative discussions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we begin with the presentation by Mr. Kurt Conrad Waldron. Mr. Waldron was admitted to practice as an attorney at law in the year 2009 in Trinidad and Tobago, and has worked both in the public and the private legal sectors of this country for the past 12 years. He's also lectured in law, and his work extends beyond his profession to his faith and church, where he faithfully serves in the community as a lay minister at the Our Lady of Fatima Roman Catholic Church in Curragh. Kurt Conrad Waldron.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson, and good evening to you and our fellow panelists and your viewing audience. And I would like at this juncture to take this opportunity to thank the National Contract Workers Association for the opportunity to join in this discourse, which I believe is needed. And Mr. Johnson, it would be remiss of me if I do not say from the onset that this issue, I believe, may very well be the most divisive one of our time. And the opportunity to examine in a very objective way the legal ramifications of it is something that we must all ensure that we, and therefore, in that light, if you would permit me to share my screen, because I have a presentation that I wish to make for the benefit of all. Option in my connectivity, it may be due to some internet. We must begin with the Constitution of our land, because the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is the supreme law of this country. And there are two fundamental rights enshrined in Section 4 that we have to examine for the purposes of this discourse. The first is Section 4A of the Constitution, which deals with the right of every individual in this land to life. At the moment, that right to life is under threat as a result of a pandemic. The next right, for the purposes of this discourse that I will present to you, would be under Section 4C of the Constitution, which deals with one's right to privacy, or as it is currently stated in the Constitution, your right to private and family life. And that too is also under threat as a result of the consequences of this pandemic. According to Section 13(1) of our Constitution, or the state as it were, can pass any legislation that expressly declares its inconsistency with those rights enshrined in our Constitution, prove that this legislation is justifiable in a society that has the utmost respect for rights and freedoms. And I want to repeat that slowly. Parliament can, under Section 13(1), pass legislation that expressly declares itself to be inconsistent with those rights to life and privacy enshrined in Section 4 of the Constitution. But the Parliament can only do that if that legislation in question is justifiable in this society, which is supposed to have respect for all fundamental rights and freedoms. So what would be regarded legally as justifiable legislation in this context? So there was a case that was touted recently, some months ago, in the public domain, and it's a case that comes from the European Court of Human Rights. And it is the case of Vavrika and others the Czech Republic. And in this case of Vavrika and others versus the Czech Republic, the facts of the case are as follows. A citizen against some very age-old illnesses in the form of polio, hepatitis B, and tetanus. But he had none of it. He took action against the state in the European Court of Human Rights for imposing that fine against him. And he cited as the basis of his suit a violation of his right to a private life under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The European Court, however, held that the interest, in that case, the interest of the public's health in achieving herd immunity from contagious diseases outweighs the individual's right to a private life. That is not me saying that. That is the case of Vavrika and others in the Czech Republic. That is what the European Court of Human Rights found. That is the ruling. Now, it seems as though, and I think we can all agree, that the question of mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations in this country or anywhere in the world is in fact a public health versus a private life argument. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. However you slice the cake, you are still slicing a cake. And the fact of the matter is that this is what this whole issue boils down to. The public health camp versus the private life camp. Now, in order for the state to mandate COVID-19 vaccinations, it must be justifiable. Such a move to interfere or to tinker with that very fundamental right to privacy has to be justifiable. So the question for us to determine at this point in this analysis is such a move justifiable? According to the principle, I want to, for the benefit of your viewing audience, let the public know that the principles of this case are not binding on us in this country, because the European Court of Human Rights is not the highest court of our land. It is, however, all of the principles coming out of this case would be persuasive, but they are not binding. So according to the case of Vavrika, the court believed that such a move would only be justifiable if it is necessary in a democratic society. So now we have to ask ourselves, is it necessary for such a move to be made in a democratic society? Anytime you are making anything in your kitchen, whatever dish it may be, say a pot of pilau, you would put different ingredients in it, yes? So in the same way that you do that, there are certain ingredients that we must put now into this pot of determining whether or not such a move is necessary. And those ingredients come out of that same Vavrika case. And these are the ingredients, and they are in the form of questions. One, in order to determine whether such a move, and by move I mean interfering with one's private life, is necessary in a democratic society, we must ask ourselves three important questions. Does the interference with your private life correspond to a pressing social need? That's the first question. Two, has the state given any reasons whatsoever for the interference? And if so, are those reasons relevant and sufficient? And three, is it proportionate to the aim pursued? Is it proportionate to the aim or objective pursued? According to the case of Vavrika, in that case, based on their facts, they believed that yes, the interference sought in that case with that man's private life did in fact correspond to a pressing social need. But why? Because according to the court in that case, based on the facts in that case, when you are dealing with a contagious disease, the state has a duty, and this is coming out of Vavrika. This is not me, this is coming out of Vavrika. The state has a duty to protect life and health and should guard against any downward trend in vaccination rates. That is the reason for the first question that we asked. The second question In Vavrika, did the state give any reasons for the interference with that man's private life? And if so, were those reasons relevant? Were those reasons given by the state, in that case, sufficient? The European Court of Human Rights said yes. Why? Because the goal of herd immunity in that case was a relevant and sufficient reason for the court's belief that vaccinations in that particular case should be mandatory. And now we come to the final question examined. The court considered, would mandatory vaccinations be proportionate, and I stress on that word, proportionate to the goal of herd immunity? We are spinning a wheel when it comes to answering this question, because proportionality is not a very easy thing to understand. But in order for us to really give this issue the latitude that it deserves, we have to examine the question of proportionality, and we have to examine it in detail. So what is the proportionality test that must be adopted in a situation like this when we are dealing with the question of mandatory vaccines? The proportionality test is a balancing act. You have to balance the state's interest in preserving public health with the individual's very real interest and right in preserving his private life or her private life. And that is not an easy balance for any one of us to sit here and undertake at this time or at any point in time. The European Court of Human Rights, in applying the proportionality test that I show you here in this presentation, said that it cannot be regarded as disproportionate for a state to require those for whom vaccination represents a remote risk to health to accept this universally practiced protective measure as a matter of legal duty and in the name of social solidarity for the sake of the small number of vulnerable children, because they were dealing with children in that case, who are unable to benefit from vaccination. In other words, what this means is that for the European Court of Human Rights, in that case, mandatory vaccination was permissible if the burden on the individual that was caused by the infringement of his rights due to the mandatory vaccine policy is less severe than the burden on the society without it. So, in a nutshell, therefore, what does this all boil down to? What is the point? The point is that the question of mandatory vaccinations will ultimately come down to one very important thing, and that is the quality, the safety, and the efficacy of the vaccines in question. In other words, we have to put the subject matter of any mandatory vaccination policy, which is the vaccine, under a microscope, under trial, and it must be, as any trial would allow, it must be shown beyond all reasonable doubt that these vaccines that are part of any mandatory policy are in fact, beyond all doubt, safe and efficacious, so that it accomplishes the goal that you are setting out to accomplish. I would at this point want to note for your viewing audience that there was one judge in that European case that dissented with his fellow judges, his colleagues. And the reason why he dissented, meaning he opposed their view, was threefold. One, he believed that their judgment was lacking in substance because it didn't address the characteristics of the vaccines themselves. So in other words, in his view, he believed that the vaccines should be put under a microscope. Two, according to that dissenting judge, he believed that there must be a very high threshold for interference with someone's right to private life. This is a right that is sacrosanct and ought to be treated as such. And three, he believed that the latitude of the state to deal with an individual's rights should be narrowed as a result. Now, that's the view of the dissenting judge. But again, this case is not binding on us. And therefore, all views both from the judges that ruled in favor and the judge that did not, ought to be examined, because in order for us to apply a legal analysis to this thing that is objective, we have to look at all sides, and we cannot be one-sided with the argument. So this is the extent of the presentation that I am able to make at this time. But what I would want to underscore for your viewing audience is the fact that if we are to arrive at a solution that is beneficial to all, we have to ensure that we truly do understand the issues. And it is incumbent upon us to be very measured in our approach. And measured, I mean in the absence of more that can be unraveled or entertained on the issue. We are still trying to learn more and more about the COVID-19 vaccines, and maybe misinformation, others credible, that we have to examine copiously and conscientiously and thoughtfully before we can arrive at any position, especially when it comes to any interference with that right of the individual to his or her public life, private life, sorry. And in that context, we have to ensure that we truly understand where we are going with this issue as a people. And I believe that it is something, a platform that can, although it has divided us in thought, we can turn it around and use it as an opportunity to understand perspectives and to flesh them out for the benefit of all.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Waldron. Let me just put it to you as a way of, this is a brilliant way to start the discussion, because we're getting in right, we got right into the meat of the issue. Let me just ask whether then the question of to make vaccines mandatory, there's a principle by which that can be done, that's what you're saying.
There is a principle and a method, and but it has to be methodical, and it's not something that can be done by the whim and fancy of anyone. And right. as mentioned, as you would have seen, it has to be justifiable.
Right. So a case has to be made. A case has to be made and to be established. And the other point is that you say that the decision of this European Court on Human Rights is not binding on us, but is it not going to be a reference point if we were to go that direction? Would it not?
Most certainly it would be. As a matter of fact, it was referred to in certain quarters already. And the reason why it was is because of the principles that I showed you a moment ago. But the one thing that stands out for me in that entire case is this, that because we are still learning a lot about the vaccines, in my personal view, and I am not opposed to vaccination at all, but I believe that some caution has to be exercised in any mandatory policy in light of the fact that we have to examine in a very thorough way whether forcing someone, making it mandatory for someone to take a vaccine is in fact a proportionate response to the goal that you are trying to achieve. And we also have to examine, if I may, the goal that you are trying to achieve. At one point in time, I believe we were told it's herd immunity. But now it seems that the goal might be the preservation of life. And because we are learning every day about these vaccines and they are still relatively new.
Yeah, and well, the point is that the herd immunity is a contributor to the preservation of lives. But I think what we've established here is that mandatory vaccination can be a possibility, and we have some things to go on with. That's the nature of the discussion. So let's bring in Mr. Joseph Remy at this stage. Mr. Remy is a former president and general secretary of the Communication Workers Union. He served as chairman of the board of governors at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies in the period 2010 to 2014. He's the president also of the Federation of Independent Trade Unions and NGOs, and is a director on the board of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago. Also, he's president of the Cooperative Credit Union League in Trinidad and Tobago and president of the Caribbean Confederation of Credit Unions and a director on the board of the World Council of Credit Unions. Mr. Joseph Remy.
Right, thanks and thanks much, Andy, and good night to everyone. Good night to fellow panelists. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the National Contract Workers and General Employees Association for organizing this particular seminar and starting, continuing some very important discussions. I am happy to be part of the process as much as I can in terms of providing some kind of input from the trade union perspective. It is going to be important. I think the more voices are raised in this particular circumstance, the better it is for all of us in Trinidad and Tobago. The issue of vaccines and its use and implications are a very complex issue with quite extensive details and commentaries. And I listened attentively to Mr. Warren just now there, and he pointed some critical legal issues. But I want to use the little time allotted to talk from a layman perspective. I fit a little trade unionist happen because, you see too much of the discussion now have been couched in uncertain and at times contradictory, scientific, technical, medical, and at times legal language that has tended to place the average worker in a state of confusion, thereby resulting in such a high rate of vaccine hesitancy. And I am convinced, and we have been doing our research, that the contradictory information is a major contributory factor to the high level of vaccine hesitancy in Trinidad and Tobago. Then we have social media with the anti-vax pushing a particular narrative. And those are the things that are confusing persons and pushing them in all different directions. But what is the fundamental issues that we want to talk about tonight? Well, what we have been asked to discuss is the legality of mandatory vaccine in Trinidad and Tobago. I could recall, and it's always good to go back to some history. I could recall as a child, I was required to take vaccine to attend primary school. And thereafter in my adult life, it was used as a condition of travel to several countries. And I could recall an incident when I was traveling to Suriname just a few years ago to represent the Cooperative Credit Union League at a leadership conference. When we got to the airport, one of my colleagues inadvertently left his vaccination card at home, and he was not allowed to board the flight to travel at all because of the rigid policy they had in place. And in those circumstances, we can arrive at the conclusion that vaccines are a necessary evil to pursue some of your life's missions. But was it mandatory for me to take the vaccine to go to primary school? And then the question is, was it mandatory for my colleagues to take the vaccine to travel to Suriname? It was a necessity for travel. Was it mandatory? Because we have to ask those questions. But I have done some reading, and I use the word reading deliberately because a lot of us now are saying we did research, when in essence we really read, we have not done research. I am very clear on that. So I would have done my reading. And I'm of the view that there was a legal requirement for children to take the vaccine to attend primary school because there was an act of parliament that was passed and enacted which debarred any child from attending primary school if they were not vaccinated. And in that reading, I came across the Public Health, Nursery Schools and Primary Schools Immunization Act 10 of 1973, 1973, which was an act that really respected immunization of persons seeking entry into the nursery schools and primary schools against certain communicable diseases. This act effectively stated that no person may be admitted into a nursery or primary school unless they produce an immunization certificate certifying that they were immunized against identified communicable diseases. They could have been granted exemptions, but on the production of certified medical grounds. And I could recall reading that in there. In addition, I also looked and Mr. Waldron talked about this section 4 of our Constitution, which recognized the existence without discrimination by race, religion, origin, color, or sex, certain fundamental rights. And he spoke about the rights of individual life, liberty, security of the person, all the other things. And the other one is freedom of conscience and religious belief and observance. So those are fundamental rights. There are others that have been enshrined in the Constitution. And then I look at the meaning of mandatory. And from where I sat, I saw mandatory means a lot of things. It could be required by law, of mandate, compulsory, binding. Effectively, it means anything that is mandatory has the quality of binding the doer to the work. So it is a compulsory kind of thing that binds you to doing certain things. But from the trade unionist perspective, and looking at what the layman will think, it was clear that the only mandatory vaccination requirement in Trinidad and Tobago was for entry into nursery and primary schools, based on the laws that we have so far. And I could recall recently, we raised the question from the trade union perspective, and we asked, is there any law that mandates vaccination for work in the environment? And the answer was an emphatic no. And even the president of the industrial court recently spoke about the issue of there's no law that mandates vaccination for work in Trinidad and Tobago. And as such, we are clear in our mind that there is nothing that bars me from working if I'm unvaccinated. The issue is, how do we get that person to be vaccinated in the first place? But I just want to go back to the nursery school issue briefly. I'm positive that it was part of the requisite parliamentary majority, and Mr. Waldron spoke about it. If there are laws, and my understanding is certain laws that goes against the grain of the Constitution, requires a particular majority in Parliament. I think is a 3/5 majority in certain cases because of the impact it has on people's rights. And if you don't have the support of the opposition, then you can't get those laws passed. But what I wanted to posit was that we placed a mandatory vaccination issue to go to primary school, and there are limited exemption. But how contradictory was that to the cry of the then Prime Minister, Dr. Rick Williams, for universal education? We have to put those things into context. And I know the whole issue of the public good over any individual rights, and those are issues that I think that has to be put in the mix. How do we balance this? And Mr. John talked about the issue of proportionality. Is the severity of the issue proportional to the measures imposed? Those are some fundamental questions that needs to be answered. But I didn't stop reading there because I'm an avid reader. So I went and looked at the USH Act, and Section 6 of the Act states that it is the duty of every employer to ensure, so far as is reasonable practicable, the safety, health, and welfare at work for all his employees. And then at Section 20A, it says that no employer or person acting on behalf of the employer shall dismiss or threaten to dismiss a worker, discipline or suspend or threaten to discipline or suspend a worker, or impose a penalty upon a worker, or intimidate or coerce a worker because that worker has acted in compliance of the Act or regulations or order made thereunder. And those are some fundamental questions. When the USH Act was passed, when the Industrial Relations Act was passed, which has a provision for the right to refuse to work in certain conditions that are dangerous to your health and safety. Now that the science is saying that you could contract the disease whether you're vaccinated or not, those are questions that need to be asked. And let me pause here to state that I am not an anti-vax person. I'm just like Mr. Waldron. I am pro-vax, but I'm anti-mandatory vaccine. And I think it is a matter of choice, and we have to respect people's choices. But what we need to do is to engage in a very inspiring educational campaign that will inspire workers to take the vaccine than to be using the sledgehammer approach. And I think that is where some of the strategies are going wrong, Andy. But when we look at Section 57 of the same USH Act, and it says, and that is an issue that we want to raise because it talks about the issue of employers forcing workers to take a PCR test at their own cost. But from where we sit in terms of the USH Act, it states, where after commencement of this act, a person seeks employment or is already employed in an industrial establishment, he may be required by the employer to undergo a medical examination as a precondition of permanent employment or to determine fitness for work, except in such shops or places of work as the minister may by order exempt. And then Section 37(2) expressly states the cost of the medical examination shall be borne by the employer. That is an express provision of the OSH Act. So, you know, we are seeing where persons are saying that you have to take 2 PCR tests in a month. The cost of a PCR test on average, let's say on the high end is $1,500, on the lower end is $1,000. Somebody who is working minimum wage, and those are the establishments we have seen these things before, have been pushed in a corner to take 2 PCR tests a month and pay for that. And you really eradicate your entire salary by doing PCR tests every month. So you're actually working to take a PCR test every 2 weeks. That doesn't make sense. That is really firing the worker. That to us is constructive dismissal. And again, from my trade union layman perspective, I wish to say that all workers are to be provided with the requisite protection to get their jobs done by the employer. And they must be, based on the OSH Act, be protected from discrimination and victimization for adhering to the provisions of the Act. This also means that it will be illegal for an employer to coerce a worker to take the vaccine by demanding, and I'm saying inspire, use the word coerce deliberately, by demanding that they pay for an expensive PCR test as a condition of their employment or to determine their fitness to continue to work. And you know, when we look at this thing, I want to say that while the vaccine is considered as a route back to normality against the COVID-19 virus, you know, and it's really an escape for all the current restrictions, because a lot of persons are really starting to feel it mentally now, because lockdown for 18 months is having some serious mental health impact on a lot of persons, workers, and the average citizens. We respect the individual right to choose this. And we're saying this is not a case of entering into a nursery school or a primary school now, because the vaccines are more now focused for adults. It's only the Pfizer vaccine in Trinidad has been earmarked for children, and there's an age bracket. This is really a choice of adults to make it a circumstance where the access to information is much more advanced than before. So that if we believe that a focused education effort, devoid of the politician voices, who from all indications would have politically tainted the efforts of the medical experts. And I am talking that from sitting down and listening to persons when they hear these press conferences. And the political voices are pushing people back against the taking the vaccine. And that to us has increased the level of vaccine hesitancy. What we need to look at also is the issue of the private enterprises. We are seeing now private enterprises are actually being used as the trailblazers by government to push the issue of mandatory vaccines, because they are the ones who are pushing it. The government is saying we are on for voluntary vaccination, but the private entities are saying, yes, we want it. But and then there is a implied to be collaboration where the government has now introduced those safe zones, which says that you could only enter if you are vaccinated. And one of the things they wanted to do, which we had to step against yesterday, tripartite meeting, was for those places that have already been opened up for operation, you wanted to convert them into a safe zone. And we are saying that is discriminatory. You can't do that. You already made those areas free for workers to engage in employment by putting all the necessary health and safety measures. And now you want to introduce the safe zone. To us, that is something that we don't agree with at all. You know, and I believe that the government strategy is done because they know that once, and I think I kind of hear from Mr. Rosgan, if they enter into the mandatory vaccine realm, then there will be a lot of judicial matters that could be raised by people challenging their rights. I don't know if it will be successful or not, but we're going to have a plethora judicial reviews and all the different things that may potentially breed resistance and increase the already intense public distrust of the mandatory vaccine trust that we are seeing being forced on persons. As such, they are really, what you are seeing now is the government really punting the issues to the private sector. You know, we are actually putting it in your sphere to take them and run with it. So in closing, I would just want to say that this controversy over vaccine is nothing new. Way back in 1796, when the first vaccine was created to treat with the smallpox, and thereafter it was made compulsory in the United Kingdom in 1853, the resistance to vaccine started to take root. There were objections on religious, health, and the trampling of rights basis back then as is happening now. These concerns have been exacerbated by the failure and or reluctance of government to provide sufficient information regarding the potentially, if comparatively rare adverse effects of vaccines. Because if you only talk about the positives and people are reading up and seeing negatives, they'll believe that you're lying to us. There's a level of mistrust that is taking place. So they have to present all the facts and the data to the population. There's a school of thought that because of the lack of transparency, there's a lack of public trust. And as such, the resistance increases. And as a result, this has pushed, to me, a disconnected government to only myopically look at the pursuit of mandatory vaccines. It is clear that there is no legal basis for mandatory vaccines in Trinidad and Tobago, but what should be mandatory is the provision of transparent data, all scientifically proven, outlining the benefits of vaccines, devoid of the patronizing of the citizens through decision-making that are done in a black box, basically. Because this approach effectively feeds the conspiracy theorists and results in reduced compliance with the government measures. And we believe that education is the critical issue in this particular case.
That's a very comprehensive presentation as well, Mr. Remy. But let me just throw back the issue of the European Court of Human Rights. So does that not stand as a standard as to how exceptions can be made to make things mandatory when otherwise they would not be? And if it is found that, as it is the saying that your freedom ends at the tip of my nose, or my freedom ends at the tip of your nose, and if there are extenuating or intervening circumstances that will make going for the vaccine as mandatory necessary, there is already precedent for it, right? And there are lawyers in the country, in no lesser persons than, say, the dean of the law school at the University of the West Indies, Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, who is nothing if she's not a human rights advocate of the first order, who is saying that the government could have proper grounds in which, if it wanted to do that, it could do that.
But Andy, that is only looking at it from a legalistic perspective, and that is why I'm saying, early on in the presentation, I said that because of the fact that these things are couched in those legal and medical and other jargon, the average layman is not seeing it that way. And yes, she has a legal background. But when we looked at what was discussed at the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, where that position, she's also a member of that committee. But the trade unionists put forward the position that there's an industrial relations issue, because the mandatory vaccine don't only apply to the average citizen. It applies to workers. And then there's an industrial relations context in the whole scenario. And you have to look at the industrial relations law. So basically, that is very important.
We'll come back to that in the discussions, because there's this the other side of it is that what do you make of those people who have gone out and gotten vaccinations and going back to work and now being forced to mingle with people who refuse to get vaccinated? But
I don't think it's a matter of force. The thing is, we have to represent both, and that's why I say we find ourselves in a very uncomfortable situation, because we have to represent all workers, both vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And that's why we believe at a proper workplace policies of critical importance at this time.
It's interesting. It's difficult, and some people would say it's invidious, but it's a process that we have to go through in this period.
Yeah,
but let me just bring Mr. Travis Sinanan into the discussion. Mr. Sinanan has been practicing at the bar in different countries for the last 39 years. He spent a lot of that time in the UK and across countries in the Caribbean in general practice. But he says there has been an element of industrial relations and employment issues in there, and he is an advocate for equal treatment, and he brings that to some of the work he takes. Mr. Travis Sinanan.
Good evening, gentlemen, and a pleasant good evening to the president of the union, who has so kindly organized and invited me to this rather important and meaningful webinar. I want to thank you all for inviting me, and I feel very privileged to be among such esteemed people. As a boy, I remember growing up, and I don't want to show how old I am, but I remember reading the column of Andy Johnson, and it was always an exhilarating column to read. You looked forward to that, and Mr. Johnson hasn't lost any of his fiery edge. First of all, let me start off by saying Comrade Remy, I think you have taken a very large hammer and hit a very small nail on its head. There is no legality, no law. I mean, up until last night, I checked and it wasn't there, right? By Parliament to say that people must be subject to mandatory vaccines. And you are perfectly correct, Comrade Remy, when you talk about constructive dismissal. Only today I had a conversation with a colleague who said to me, well, what we have done is told all our staff, get vaccinated. If they don't, every 2 weeks, they must have a PCR test at their own cost. And if they can't, they leave. Now, I thought that was brutal. I thought that was callous. And then he said, you know, we're not subject to the ruling of the industrial court because we are a private firm. And this is what is happening. The rights of the individual as workers and employees in this country are being trampled upon. And under the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, and fellow attorney Waldron will correct me because he quoted chapter and verse, I think somewhere there, and if I'm being facetious, it is not intentional, is that there is a freedom of choice. And a freedom of choice means what it says. It is good old-fashioned basic English. Freedom of choice. Freedom of expression. They're not hearing it. And we have seen a situation where people have had that freedom of choice being systematically eroded under the guise of what is best for the country. And I want to go back a little bit in time to the great philosopher Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham spoke about utilitarianism. And he said it is an ethical theory holding that actions are morally right, and these are the important parts, if they tend to promote happiness or pleasure, and morally wrong if they tend to promote unhappiness or pain among those affected by them. So where are we, gentlemen? You get vaccinated, and those who are vaccinated are saying, we are happy because we are vaccinated, but we are unhappy because of those who are unvaccinated. Those who are unvaccinated are saying, we are happy because we have made a freedom of choice. But now, because we have chosen not to be vaccinated, for whatever reason, we are now being treated as outcasts. And we are heading for society that is fast becoming like what you have in Canada, the them and us society. And if that evolves, gentlemen, I don't want to be melodramatic, but World War II was based on the them and us. The genocide in Rwanda was based on the them and us. And if it is people are being segregated and told, well, you can't go and sit down in any restaurant because you're not vaccinated. Collect your food at the side of the road. Is that not trampling upon the freedom of choice? And, you know, I want to come back to what my brother attorney said. And the learned moderator raised it when he asked Comrade Remy about the European Court of Human Rights in Czechoslovakia. Well, let us stand back for a start. The Czechoslovakian system of law is totally different. It is not a common law system. It is a system that does not have, as we have in English common law, built into it a system of rights. It is a system that is written, and it is a system that can be changed. We have conventions and customs from an unwritten constitution that have now become written into our constitution, protecting the rights and freedoms of all English common law Commonwealth jurisdiction, republic or not. And also Czechoslovakia has, I am sure, I haven't counted them, but I'm sure they have more than 1.4 million people, right? And having said that, different conditions apply. And you have to look at everything that is happening on the in Eastern Europe against the backdrop of Brexit, the outburst that happened with all the countries that suddenly thought it was all well and good to go around without masks and not socially distant. And that has led to spikes. So based on what the Czechoslovakian government can do and their constitution and their rule of law, they change the constitution to suit. We can't do that. We have an embedded, inherent freedom of choice that every one of us in this room or on this panel has, which is sacrosanct. It cannot be interfered with. And when you chip away, and look, you know, I talked about the them and us. And I saw a very wry and erudite smile come across the face of Moderator Johnson. Because remember, the Jews were a star. They couldn't go certain places. Now we are told we can't go to gyms. Well, I always say the best gym you could find in Trinidad is the Savannah, right? It is free, it is in the sunshine, and you could exercise to your heart's content, right? Not that I have made use of it recently, but that's a different story. In addition to which, cinemas and other places. But I ask myself this question. They're telling all these people, oh, you're vaccinated, go ahead and enjoy the benefits of these various places. But as I think Comrade Remy has said, there's no proof that the vaccination works. So where are we? Because, you know, Comrade Remy, you talked about getting your shots when you were at school. I remember that too. They used to come to the school to give you the shots. And you used to dread having to line up and pull up your left sleeve, you know? But afterwards, you felt it was like a war trophy. You always compared it with your colleagues in class to see who had the bigger bump, you know? But that was for something specific. Measles, mumps, rubella, and it was something for something specific. This pandemic is unfolding faster than we could even catch up with it. And it is changing all the time. So when you get a vaccination, who knows how far behind you are? And you are playing catch up, and they are telling you, take the vaccine. So what happens now? God forbid, when we have people who are vaccinated who get a variant, what are we going to tell them? Go and get vaccinated, get a booster. You see, I think we have to look at it not only from the medical point of view, but from the legal point of view. If people make a conscious choice that I do not want to get vaccinated for whatever reason, be it religious, be it health, be it scientific, be it medical, that must be respected. But don't treat them as like an outcast and a pariah and make them feel, well, you know, you're not vaccinated, and you hold up a cross and garlic towards them. The thing is, we have to look at what was said. And I think, as Comrade Remy said, the learned president of the Industrial Court made a very clear statement. You cannot unilaterally, without consultation, without agreement, and without proper discussions, even where you sit down, right, and discuss it about changing the terms of the contract on a worker. You can't do that. And consultation doesn't mean that an employer turns around and says, oh, by the way, you have to get vaccinated, otherwise you can't come to court. That's from tomorrow, that's the policy. That's not consultation. In good industrial relations and principles, it means sitting down, collective bargaining. It is part of collective bargaining. What is good for the worker, why it must be brought in, and then let them make a choice. But we have had a situation now where we have seen those are being trampled upon by private individuals. And the thing is, these employees who do not belong to a union are between a rock and a hard place. They need the job, so they get vaccinated, because they certainly cannot go out and pay $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 for a PCR test. And in fact, some of them may not even earn that. So we have a situation whereby that these rights are being compromised. And I wonder whether the public at large has actually grasped the nettle to say, look, I don't want to be vaccinated. I have my rights. And you know, I listen to attorneys talking about if children are not vaccinated, that those parents should stand some consequence or penalty. I have to ask myself whether that was a serious statement. I mean, that is a serious question for me. You want to tell me what is best for my child? Who knows my child better than I do?
All right, I think we had a point where Mr. Sinana, I think we had a point where we could open the discussion to those people who are filing in their questions and so on. But let me just read something from, this is the Express of Sunday, Wednesday, September 22nd. It was a wraparound on the question of to vaccinate or not. And inside the back page of what was containing the rest of the paper, it said, this is a figure here, 99.4% of persons who have died from COVID-related illnesses occurred in persons who were not vaccinated or not fully vaccinated. Last night on the news and in the papers this morning, there was a man who, Mr. Teixeira is his name, I don't know if you saw him and you saw it, and he was advising people. He got COVID and he survived it. Said the person who was on the bed with him for many days didn't make it. His advice to all of us is that the vaccination is like a bulletproof vest. You may not survive 100%, or 100% of the people who take it may not survive it, but that it is the best position, sort of insurance policy we have, as weak as it may be in some cases. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that's an individual choice to say, you know, that as a result, he had COVID and he got vaccinated, and it's the best you can have. But the fact of the matter is, he already had the virus. The virus is in his system. The fact of the matter is, it's an individual choice. Now, I am going to ask this question or pose this question. A lot of people have gone and got vaccinated. And people have passed away, but we don't know how many of those people who have been vaccinated have actually passed away after vaccination. And I make this point.
Yeah.
I want to make this point very briefly because I know I'm coming close to my time. In March of last year, I don't think we had many deaths at all. I think they were minimal, if anything.
Well, that's when it really started, March 2020. The first case we had was on March 5th, 2020, when somebody was said brought it in on a flight from
Yeah.
Guyana, and I happened to be on a flight from Guyana on that day coming back from the elections, and I was worried for months. But
Yeah.
that was not the
But
case.
the fact of the matter, Moderator Johnson, is since vaccination started, we have noticed a spiraling, right? Or an acceleration in the number of deaths. And if you take last year, when we weren't vaccinated, or people weren't getting vaccinated, or encouraged to be vaccinated, to now, we have more deaths now as a result, or since vaccination has entered the arena, compared to when we didn't have vaccination.
Yeah, the
I
figures say
can't
that.
answer the question, but
Yeah.
I'm saying it's a parallel to be looked at.
Yeah, certainly.
So those are my comments and my presentation. I hope I wasn't too long.
Not at all. Thank you very much. You raised again some very valid points in it to consider. And let's sort of bring some of the people who have been following us on the chat thus far. Let me ask somebody saying this is a question. Well, let me just make this point before. It's a sort of informational announcement here to say that the organizers of this forum, which will run until Friday, began last night and run until Friday, had invited the Attorney General or his representative to be represented on these discussions. We got no response from them. Similarly, with the Minister of Health, an invitation went to the Minister of Health for himself or someone he would deputize, and we've had no responses from them. So we just wanted to put that on the record. And there's this question from Cassandra Bertrand from YouTube. More than 50% of the country is unvaccinated. If this 50% is barred from safe zones, can 50% vaccinated carry the economy? Mr. Remy, you want to take that?
Yes, Andy, and that is a very, I love that question. And those are the things that we have been saying. We have seen the decimation of a lot of small enterprises, and we are now seeing some of the medium enterprises are now feeling the pinch. And I'm now using my credit union experience to talk about a lot of small businesses are folded. Even if when the government extended the liquidity support program to the credit union, it was not a grant, it was a loan. And it means that you had to repay. And the challenge is that if we don't have stimulation in the economy, then we are going to have challenges. And I'm not convinced that the safe zones is going to be the economic panic. I don't think that is going to bring the desired result that we are seeking in this circumstance. I think if we do proper education, if employers engage in good health and safety practices, and we talk from the trade union perspective of doing proper risk assessment, so we could have proper risk mitigation in measures according to industry specific and site specific circumstances, we could have the broader economy opening up where that question is not going to be raised anymore, because we're going to have more than 50% of the employees back on the job. We're going to have economic activity, but we're going to have it done in a much safer environment by the way how we practice the things differently. And we can't push the cost back down to the employee, because that is going to, the people really spend their money in our economy are the workers, the average working class person, Let's be real. The person who makes a lot of money go out to Miami and go out elsewhere and shop, and that is the challenge we have, And if we don't have economic activity taking place among the working class, then a lot of businesses will close down effectively.
Yeah, and on the point about the positions they are articulated by the president of the industrial court, a good bit of what she was saying, I tried to reiterate more than once, and she, to some extent, she was giving a sort of on the one hand and then on the other hand view. And she, to me, what I took away from it in the final analysis is saying that given our legal and constitutional system, the government has some leeway if it wants to change the nature of the game and bring legislation to make vaccines mandatory. It has not done that yet. There's nothing there at the moment to make it do that, but it can take the steps necessary to do that. How do you respond to that?
Well, and she was clear, and I think it is lucid, and I think I heard some implied in what Mr. Warren was saying was something to that effect. The issue is, what are the risks? what are the risks involved in going in that direction? And even Mr. Sinan was alluding to it. There are going to be a lot of legal challenges. And I think that a government is looking at their own survival rate. You know, they're looking at how do I continue in office in a circumstance where I can make a decision that could interfere with my political sustainability. And those are fundamental questions. The issue is that they could attempt to bring the law. One, look at this construct of parliament. They don't have a chief-whip majority, which I believe, and I need Mr. Waldron to correct me, Mr. Sinanan also, if you have to have mandatory vaccination at this time, any law that provides for that must be done by with a chief-whip majority in parliament. And I'm not sure if they believe, they would not be able to garner the support of the opposition at this time. I could say that, not that I am opposition to it, but I think based on the political posturing, it's going to be difficult to do it. So they know that, yes, there may be an avenue to bring the law, but the risk involved in bringing that law is much greater. So I think the education campaign and the issue of taking a different approach, letting the Minister of Health take a back seat in some of the communications to the public and allow the CMO and his experts to talk the issue and talk from a scientifically based issue that the layman can understand without political patronizing the issues. That is going to have a big effect on people's uptake of the vaccine.
A good point. And let me get Kurt and Mr. Sinan on this as well. In the discussion last evening, Dr. Denise Swefat Angus raised that in a particular context. She said that there should be more of meeting with the people rather than talking at the people. And she was advocating go to community centers, go to places where people meet in their own localities and so on, hold meetings and address people's anxieties and concerns rather than to hold a press conference 3-4 times a week sometimes. Mr. Sinanan, what's your view on that?
I totally endorse that. I listened to when she was saying it, and it is something that clearly they have not done. They haven't spoken to the people and say, look, this is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. This is how we're going to do it. And these are the consequences or possible consequences of it. We have these press conferences which last maybe for an hour or two, and we have a lot of information from 3 or 4 different people thrown at us. And I think Comrade Remy is right. The Minister of Health, who's not a doctor, should take a back seat. You know, it's horses for courses. Let those who know come in and say, this is what we are doing and this is why we're doing it. You see, there is a lack of information, a lack of interaction. So people are only being told, this is what you should do. But as you say, the interpersonal relationship is not happening. And people therefore are beginning to, you know, nobody is going to say, okay, well, you say to do it, I'm going to do it. Trinidadians are not stupid. They're going to question why. And I think there needs to be a whole lot more of interaction, explanation, and also demonstration of where we're going and why we're going there.
Yeah, so let's go back a little bit on the decision of the European Court of Human Rights, because in a lot of respects, that court sets particularly human rights standards and precedents for the rest of the world, whether they're accepted or not. But they set some benchmarks, and this could be one, wouldn't you say, for the rest of the world?
Well, it could be, but you have to distinguish the facts of that case with what is happening here. Because, for instance, as my Lenin friend had pointed out, in that particular case, they were dealing with ancient illnesses or diseases that were tried and tested when it comes to vaccines. This is a very novel situation. That's why they call it the novel coronavirus. And every day, every single day, something new comes to the fore, and we learn something new about the efficacy of the vaccines. And there is a plethora of information out there, one way or the other, that speaks to that. But coming to the issue of what was being discussed as well, as one of the principles of the ECHR had enunciated, proportionality is the key. And that is something that it seems that it is lacking in certain places of work when we hear of situations in which private employers are issuing, certain mandates to ensure that their workers are vaccinated. You have to talk to people. You have to talk to people to ensure that people understand the issue. You have to talk to people to ensure that they are comfortable. Actually, it was the Prime Minister of Barbados that enunciated that position recently when she said that inherently her cabinet is not in favor of mandatory vaccinations, but that what she would want to do is go to the people and talk to them and ensure that, that if it is that you are uncertain, she said that we're going to make sure that you have information that could probably help you to change your mind. Whether we want to take it or not, the fact of the matter is that this is a human issue. And a human issue demands a human response. And that in itself, a human and a humane response, is where the entire issue of proportionality lies. Because if, for example, say, take yourselves back, to times when you were younger, and someone may have, pushed you in school, and you want to defend yourself. You would have to, if you are defending yourself, issue a proportionate response in defending yourself. So you see, the entire argument really and truly does come down to what response we as a people wish to adopt to a very untenable situation that we all agree has to have a response. But when we go in a direction that is not in keeping with proportionality, then we may be veering off course. What I am saying in light of the situation is that caution is necessary.
And caution is proportionality. How do we establish proportionality in a case like this, in an instance like this?
Well, at the moment we are guided by those principles that tell us that it must be that the subject matter of what you are proposing to do has to be under a microscope. And the question of proportionality is answered by the question of efficacy. And every day, as I said, we are learning more and more about the efficacy of the vaccines. There may very well be a day when, maybe years from now, I can't say, when just like the vaccines for polio and hepatitis and others, chickenpox and so on, there may come a time when these vaccines would have been tried and tested and true. And maybe at that point in time, that might probably be the time, if it becomes necessary, for the issue of making them mandatory to come to the fore and become a reality, if it is necessary.
Yeah.
But remember what the European Court said. It has to be, and our Constitution speaks to it, it has to be justified. And the only way in which something like that, tinkering with someone's constitutional right to privacy, is affected. The only way that could be affected is if you are absolutely sure beyond all doubt, that the vaccines would in fact help you to achieve your goal. And as I said earlier, I am not certain what the goal is anymore, because at one point in time, we had heard that it was herd immunity. But now, as a result of the fact that we are hearing that even persons who are vaccinated can still contract the virus, it may very well be that the goal is the preservation of life. And that too is also enshrined in Section 4A of the Constitution.
But is it not established that, again, going back to that figure about the people, the majority of people who die are people who have not taken the vaccines? Let me get Mr. Remy in that on here, because I want to get to the point of, let's take the issue at the Republic Bank, in which they are saying, they're using these terms, I don't know if euphemistically, that what they're seeking to do is to protect safety and security in the workplace, which is why they are trying to insist on people getting vaccinated, because you're coming back in that situation where you have some vaccinated and some who aren't vaccinated, and how you separate them, and if it's the separation even on the cards. What do we make of that? What do we make of the people, like I said earlier on, who were vaccinated were persuaded to get vaccinated, and now they have to rub shoulders with people who, for whatever reason, decided not getting vaccinated.
There are a lot of things in that question you asked. One is, you say persuaded to be vaccinated. They made a choice. At the end of the day, they made a choice. The other persons also made a choice.
Based on heavy persuasion by the government and the proponents of it. I mean, there were people. There was a time when they were. There was a time when there were press conferences every day.
I know. So what my issue with the Republic Bank issue, and we are happy that it is going to be tested in the court, because eventually that is where it is going to be determined one way or the other. And I believe this is going to go all the way to the Privy Council because of the precedent it could set in a circumstance like this. And for the lawyers, I know this is good because it is good learning, and it's going to bring out all kind of different, issues in terms of and principles. But our concern is that I asked a guy a question. If I am unvaccinated, right, and I come to your job and I get COVID from a vaccinated person, who is going to take liability for that? Mm-hmm. Nobody can answer that question, because as Kurt says, the issue of this thing as a novel virus, and the fact that every day, look at the CDC, you getting so much of different directives from the CDC, because they are all they have been trying this thing. It's an organic thing. The thing is moving every day. It is changing shape. It is changing form. It is having different impacts. And you can't pin it down to say, okay, we have pinned down smallpox, we have pinned down polio, so we know exactly what this is going to do, and this is going to prevent it. And then, I read an article here, it says that you're really injecting something in a healthy body, That is a fundamental issue, Remember, this is not a case where somebody has COVID and I'm giving them medication to cure them, I am taking a healthy person and injecting them with a biological substance that may have some impact on them. So at the end of the day, you have to give the person the right to choose. Our issue with the Republic Bank scenario is the PCR test. And they go as very straight up front. They said they are not anti-vax, they are pro-vax. And we said that. We have most of our trade union leaders in the progressive trade, we have pro-vax. We are talking to our workers to take the vaccine, but we respect their choice. We respect their choice. And I think that is the fundamental issue. And in the Republic Bank case, I don't think they are respecting the person's choice, because what they are doing, they are making the word, I think Mr. Sinan said it, is we against them. That is what Republic Bank is promulgating now, the vaccinated against the unvaccinated. And you're creating divisions in the workplace. That is not going to have any motivational impact. That is not going to inspire and increase productivity. You have to look at the spin-off effect in the workplace if we don't do the things right. And I believe that people need to step back and change direction. We have to change direction. The issue was, boy, everybody going on there, let me get vaccinated. No, let us pull back now and say, let us educate people and talk about the good and the bad, the pros and the cons of the vaccine. And let us start to spread. We have gone too far down a road, and the hesitancy has increased to a point now where people have drawn swords and they're holding on to pole position. It will take good inspirational leadership to pull us back in this circumstance.
Yeah, and just even if it's only provocatively, you make the point about the possibility of somebody getting COVID from somebody who has already been vaccinated. But what is the probability of that? Is there any established probability to the extent of which somebody who has been sufficiently vaccinated can transmit the virus, and what are the chances of that happening, such that you would leave provisions for that, or you'd, as my grandmother would say, you make providement for the fact that could happen.
And that is the issue, and that is the information, that is the scientific information that we believe that the politicians should move away from, and allow the medical experts to come and start to talk and bring that scientific information to the public in a transparent manner. They must say to the public, yes, you can contract the vaccine, the virus from a vaccinated person, but these are the probabilities, these are the possibilities, and they have to break it down in a scientific language, in a layman's manner for them to understand. But when you don't give them the information transparently, everybody now have an account, everybody have access to Google, and everybody is going to go on the internet and they're going to pull up something, and there's a plethora of anti-vax information there now that people are going to succumb to. in the absence of being properly educated and informed. And that is the fundamental. That's why we have to step back now and reassess our strategic direction in terms of getting people to be vaccinated.
Yeah,
Mr. Moderator, sorry,
Yes.
is it possible just to make two very brief points?
Certainly, go ahead.
I know you said that the European Court of Human Rights sets the benchmark for human rights, whether countries follow it or not. But what is significant is we all know that in England, I think it's last year and maybe the year before, there were many deaths a day, and people were dying from COVID, etc. And even, I suppose, this year to a certain extent, but no one has even the present Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, in his craziest moment, has not come out and said about mandatory vaccine, simply because the European Court of Human Rights, as my colleague would agree, is only persuasive. There are certain countries who are tied into the treaty would accept it, but the United Kingdom has moved away from it. They have now the Supreme Court, which used to be the House of Lords, really. So it's the same thing, but just a different name.
Yeah.
And they have made it clear that they don't intend to follow the European Court of Human Rights if it impacts on their domestic law or is not of benefit to their population. And we are governed. It is highly persuasive and in instances quite binding, because the same people who sit in the Supreme Court sit on the Privy Council, which is our own high court, the highest court for this jurisdiction in England. So no one has even dared think of it or to put God out of their thoughts and say, let us talk about mandatory vaccines, despite all that was happening, because they have said the right to privacy, the right to freedom of choice, the right to freedom of expression are sacrosanct. And the courts have made it clear by their comments, we will protect it jealously. And they are also protecting the rights of workers jealously. In the United Kingdom, workers have the choice whether to get vaccinated or not. In some instances, some people, some employers are going down the road of mandatory vaccines. Well, there's a whole list and catalog of cases in the industrial tribunals and in the employment appeal tribunals against this. And I have no doubt that they are going to be in favor of the workers. The other thing that occurred to me, and is a dangerous thing to say, it's a double-edged sword. If everybody wants to talk about should we be vaccinated, should we not be vaccinated, and you have a population which is divided, should we not call a referendum? Call the people and say, let us have a referendum. I say that as a double-edged sword because they called a referendum with Brexit and look what happened. As a result of which they're feeling the pain now with no petrol. But that's a by the by. But I am saying this is an issue that affects everyone. And for everyone to have a say, they must have a say in a systematic, ordered way, not just having to say, well, I disagree what was said in the case in the conference or the news conference. People must have a say. And I think, if anything would bring people out to have their say, would be something like this. Because I saw some of the questions coming up and they're asking about their right to privacy. And if they get ill, what is to happen? I mean, so I thought I'd just make those 2 points. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to extend on it, but I was going to refer to one of those questions. There's somebody making the point that Cassandra Bernard, if more than 50% of the country is unvaccinated, and if this 50% is barred from safe zones, can 50% vaccinated carry the economy? And people saying, some man saying is that the people who will run the safe zones, to what extent that will be the case? Who will police the safe zones? And can gyms and hairdressing salons opposite on a 50% intake of business. Joseph Remy, you want to take that?
That is a major challenge. I think people have now resigned themselves to survival. And that is basically what is happening. So it's, you know how the old people used to say, better half a loaf than
Yes.
none. And people have now resorted to the half a loaf scenario. And that is having severe health issues and mental health issues, because some people are living beyond their means, and they don't have a choice but to go outside. Their barbers and saloons and those things. They don't have the kind of customers around that they used to have, because people don't have the money to go and do those things anymore, because it's a spiraling effect. You know, they don't have the money because they're not making enough. The person who not working, who normally will go by the barber twice a month or something like that, sometimes they go once every 2 months. That reduces the income of the barber. Then the person who is working is on a reduced income. They can't survive on that. And then most of those persons operating in rental facilities. So it's the domino effect. The landlord is not being impacted because the landlord can't get the kind of rent he wants. And then the landlord can't spend in the economy. It has a domino effect.
And something you reminded me of with your comment there, about the effect of the lockdowns, because we don't have sufficiency of mental health professionals in the country to deal with the mental health implications of lockdowns, in some cases for 18 months. So that is another, that's the source of another kind of discussion we will be having 6 months from now, a year from now.
I would hope everybody in a good mental state to be engaged in the discussion. That might be the risk. Let's hope everybody's properly mentally, healthy to be engaged in those kind of discussions, because it's 18 months and a lot of persons are definitely suffering on the end. And, sitting on the ground, walking around, when I go sometime in the morning, I'm tired to go and buy papers, you're chatting with persons and they, well, I see on this, but how much pressure I'm trying to survive on so and so, and they call me, could you give me $10? You want fixed income, you have to help out. You don't have a choice because of the you seeing the impact every day. It's frightening. It's not that we are crying wolf. It's just that we are talking reality here.
Yeah, we're coming up on a couple of minutes before we have to wrap it up. But let me ask you to start and let me get a response from each of you. I want to provoke you back into the politics. The Prime Minister, at his last press conference, he said specifically and sort of ominously that other countries have taken sterner measures and they're in a better place than us. I want to put that against what you're saying, that maybe they have not moved to make the thing mandatory because they'll have to go to Parliament and they won't win because it's they don't have 3/5 majority in the Parliament. You think that is somehow a block between what may be being contemplated and what is continuing, that they besieging people to just take the vaccine rather than forcing it on them? You think because they don't have a parliamentary majority?
I am convinced that they know that they don't have a parliamentary majority, but I think the method of communication, the languaging, the narrative, the tone has to change from talking down to talking with. And I think someone said that last night. Let us talk with the citizens. And I love the idea of going in the communities, but not the politicians. Let the experts, the medical persons come in a community center, talk to the citizens. Persons will now feel more confident to talk their personal issues with a medical doctor than with a politician. What happens when you talk your business with a politician. Your goose cook, as the people would say. So I am convinced that is the way to go, and I would hope that community engagement would be something that they would look at.
Mr. Sinana, your closing remarks around that point?
Well, I endorse what Comrade Remy says, but I also say that if they knew they had the power or they had the opportunity and the leeway to do it, they would have done it a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I think they're trying to cajole people into saying, take the vaccine. Other countries have taken sterner measures, but we can't compare ourselves to other countries. We have to look at what goes on here with us, and we have to look at what is best for us. And if you have a population that is divided, you can't just come out and say, this should be done and that should be done. And yes, maybe going out into the community may bring about a better understanding. But I don't think, I personally think, if they knew they could have done it or they had the power to do it, they'd have done it a long time. So they're
Yeah.
trying now just to say, listen, well, we could, but it's a sort of veiled sort of Damocles hanging over the heads of, the population. But at the end of the day, they know they can't do it. They know they can't do it.
All right, Kurt Waldron.
I believe before anything is done, you have to go to the people, because the people are the ones that matter. And in going to the people, you have to solicit from the people their views holistically. You have to solicit their intentions. This is a very divisive issue. And for me personally, it's sad because, what I see when I look at my country, I see a nation divided like never before. We have in our national anthem the word side by side we stand. Side by side we stand. But can we honestly say that that exists today? For better or worse, we have to continue, all of us, we all have to continue to live right here on this soil. And we have to coexist regardless of our differences. And whether it is legally possible or not, and in my opinion, it is legally possible. The question that must be answered is it right? Is it just? Is it proportionate?
All right, and there's one question that I didn't get to ask, but I'll try and find a way to bring it in, on the remaining nights. That is the extent to which it's seen as cynical, giving people inducements to take the vaccine, whether it's hampers at work or extra pay or bonuses and that kind of thing. But I imagine all of you feel the same way about that.
Definitely. I think it's really going to the extreme, Andy, and that's what I think. I think we just say, go to the people. You don't have to go and try. You see, when we develop that welfare culture, we're talking about it, and we perpetuating it by doing that. So you're paying me to go and take a vaccine. That to me is not what's supposed to happen. They're giving me a box of KFC to take a vaccine. So I'm taking the vaccine and going to get killed with the KFC at the end of the day. It's a contradiction. Those are the things I don't agree with. Let us go to the people. And I was saying, go with the scientists that I would feel comfortable sitting in my community center with a doctor to talk about the effect of a vaccine, not with the other thing or those guys who shouting political garbage, and I think that is what we need.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Joseph Remy, Kurt Waldron, and Travis Sindenan. That will do it for us this evening. Let me just tell you tomorrow what's on the bill: the rights of the employer and the employee in relation to mandatory COVID-19 vaccines and mandatory PCR tests. Those in the panel: Diane Haddad, Mr. Keston Nanku, MP Rudy Indar Singh, and Mr. Michael Anazet, another trade unionist. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for this evening. I want to thank our viewers and those who participate in it. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks to the organizers once again, and we see you back here at the same time tomorrow.
Thank you very much to everyone, and a pleasant good night to everyone.
Kurt and Mr. Sinanan, was a pleasure talking with you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. A pleasant night to all.
Okay,
very welcome.